Oscar Piastri arrives in Abu Dhabi as the mathematical outsider, yet he carries the one element McLaren would rather avoid confronting this late in the season, a contractual clause that limits the team's ability to use team orders against him. For most of the year, this detail stayed in the background, but the accumulation of strategic missteps, from Australia to Monza, and finally the Qatar collapse, has pushed that clause back into the spotlight. Piastri finds himself in a rare position, still in contention for the title, while also being the only driver on the grid who can legally refuse an instruction designed to secure the championship for his teammate. Andrea Stella has insisted that McLaren will continue to prioritise fairness and transparency, yet he also admitted that the team is prepared to intervene if the championship is at risk. That is where the conflict lies. Piastri is not simply willing to push back. He is contractually entitled to do so if following an order would eliminate his remaining chance of becoming world champion. And after Qatar, where he lost a near-certain victory due to a misjudged strategy call, the signs of tension are increasingly difficult to ignore. Visible frustration from Piastri, limited support at Parc Fermé, and a rising debate over whether McLaren have truly treated both drivers equally. Abu Dhabi is the moment where this long-dormant clause may end up deciding the entire season. If McLaren are forced to ask Piastri to step aside for Norris, will he comply, or trigger the biggest internal crisis of McLaren's modern era? Stay with us, and remember to subscribe so you don't miss the full breakdown of what could become one of the defining controversies of this championship fight. As the field arrives at Yas Marina, the pressure on McLaren is not simply sporting, it is structural. The team has engineered a season strong enough to secure the Constructors' title early, yet the internal dynamic between Norris and Piastri has become progressively more delicate as the year unfolded. The numbers place Norris in the strongest position with 408 points, Verstappen next with 396, and Piastri just behind on 392. But mathematics alone do not tell the full story. This season has been shaped by a series of strategic calls that repeatedly placed Piastri on the disadvantaged side of the equation, even as the team insisted that its philosophy, widely labelled the papaya rules, was built on integrity and equal opportunity. Qatar was the clearest example of how McLaren's pursuit of fairness drifted into unintended consequences. A safety car on lap 7 created the ideal moment to pit both cars, and every frontrunner except McLaren seized the opportunity. Stella later explained that the team feared their drivers would emerge into heavy midfield traffic. "We want to be fair to our drivers. We want to race with integrity," he said after the race, noting that double-stacking Norris would have cost additional time. But in reality, staying out achieved exactly the scenario they were trying to avoid. Both cars rejoined the race behind slower traffic at both of their eventual stops, and Piastri's advantage, he had been dominant all weekend, evaporated. Zak Brown reinforced the idea that the call was based on tyre expectations rather than driver priority, saying the team believed minimising time on the hard compound was the better path. But the hard tyre proved perfectly competitive, and the misjudgment cost Piastri what should have been a straightforward victory. It also deepened the perception that McLaren were unwilling to allow him to benefit from a favourable scenario, even when he had earned track position. This is where the contract clause becomes central. In most teams, a driver could be instructed to hand over a position if the championship situation demanded it. Piastri's agreement with McLaren contains a safeguard. As long as he remains mathematically able to win the title, no order that directly undermines that possibility can be enforced. Even Jacques Villeneuve, speaking after Qatar, argued that the damage to Piastri's morale was severe enough for him to believe the conspiracy theory circulating in the paddock that McLaren would prefer Norris to win. "Once you're on the losing end or you're in a bad spell, everything goes through your mind," Villeneuve said. "Then you start believing it, and because you believe it, you make it happen." That emotional dimension cannot be ignored, because Abu Dhabi presents exactly the type of scenario where the team may attempt to intervene. If Verstappen leads the race, Piastri is second and Norris is fourth, Verstappen becomes champion. In that moment, the logical team-oriented instruction would be for Piastri to slow and bring Norris into the required podium position. Without the clause, the order would be simple. With it, Piastri can, legitimately, say no. And based on the frustration he expressed after Qatar, where he cut a visibly dejected figure and criticized the strategic call, it is entirely possible that he would refuse. Yet his season is not defined solely by Qatar. The earlier rounds established the pattern. In Australia, Piastri was clearly faster, yet was told to hold station behind Norris. At Monza, he was instructed to give back second place after Norris lost time in the pits. McLaren justified both decisions through the lens of caution, avoiding intra-team collisions and honouring pre-race agreements. But in both cases, Piastri was the one who sacrificed points. In Singapore, Norris forced his way past Piastri after bouncing off Verstappen, and though the team later judged the move inconsistent with their rules, the internal penalty they issued was swiftly reversed. Individually, each incident can be explained. Collectively, they map a season where the benefit of doubt consistently fell to Norris, and whether or not this was intentional, the effect is the same. Piastri enters Abu Dhabi in a position where trust has eroded, and where his contractual right to resist may be the only tool he has left to assert control over his own championship outcome. His disadvantage extends beyond strategy. Piastri is required to give up his car in FP1 to Pato O'Ward as part of McLaren's rookie allocation. Stella acknowledged the lost track time but said the mandatory session had to be fulfilled. The problem is that Abu Dhabi's FP1 takes place in conditions that do not match qualifying or the race. Losing that hour may not decide the title, but it narrows Piastri's preparation window in a weekend where every detail is magnified. Meanwhile, Verstappen and Red Bull approach the finale with the clarity of a team that knows exactly what its objective is. Laurent Mekies said that having Yuki Tsunoda fully switched on for Abu Dhabi would be super important, a reminder that Red Bull's satellite drivers can influence the competitive landscape in ways McLaren cannot counter. Verstappen's form has been formidable. 5 wins in the last 8 races have transformed him into the most immediate threat to Norris. Much of the pressure that should have been absorbed by McLaren's operational execution has been shifted onto Piastri's shoulders, all while Norris retains the preferred trajectory. The wider media expectation reflects this imbalance. Most F1.com writers predict Norris will secure the championship, citing not only his points advantage, but his strong record at Yas Marina and McLaren's underlying pace. But even they acknowledge that Piastri's route is not impossible. History supports that idea. The last 2 title deciders involving 3 drivers, 2007 and 2010, were won by the outsider starting 3rd in the standings. Alex Jacques noted that the Australian would likely need contact between his rivals to have a real chance, but the scenario itself is not unprecedented. Piastri's stance is therefore entirely rational. In his own words, if a driver is still in condition to win the title, then we will respect this. That line, originally spoken by Stella, is also the shield Piastri may wield if asked to compromise. He does not need to argue emotion, he only needs to point to the maths. The ambiguity lies with McLaren. Stella has said repeatedly that the team will not exclude either driver while both remain in contention, yet he also confirmed that collaboration between the drivers could become necessary, depending on how Sunday develops. It is this duality, fairness in principle, intervention in practice, that risks tearing the team apart in a high-pressure moment. If the first half of the season taught McLaren anything, it is that clarity of instruction matters. A hesitant or contradictory message could trigger a decision from Piastri that the team cannot undo. And unlike most internal disputes, this one would unfold live, uncensored, in a title-deciding race. Should Piastri refuse an instruction, the implications extend far beyond this weekend. It would challenge McLaren's narrative of unity, expose the fragility of their internal policies, and potentially reshape the relationship between the drivers next season. It may even alter how teams write contracts for young drivers who rise quickly enough to fight for championships. The irony is that Piastri's refusal would not be selfish. It would be the logical conclusion of a season where he has repeatedly accepted setbacks in the name of team harmony, only to see his own chances compromised. And so the title will be decided partly on pace, partly on strategy, and partly on whether McLaren ask a question their own driver is legally empowered to reject. If the moment arrives where Norris needs a favour and Piastri is the only one who can provide it, the entire championship may hinge on a single word from a driver who has every reason to think twice before saying yes. Will McLaren risk everything by issuing an order that Oscar Piastri has every contractual right to refuse?